housekeeping notes before we begin. This press conference will be live streamed at TIFF.net and on the YouTube channel. Volunteers with microphones will be the audience to assist you with your questions. Please remember to identify yourselves and your media outlet. This year we're going to have a group shot of the cast on the stage at the beginning, right before the press conference. After that, no photography is permitted in this room except for the approved wire photographers. If you'd like a photo from today's session, you can ask for the press office and they'll be happy to give you one. And lastly, please make sure your cell phones are turned to silent. Thanks so much. We'll begin in a minute.
Hello.
Just wait here, guys, for the group shot.
Oh, no, we're sorry about that.
Group shot. Just up here.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Whoa. You guys are excited, aren't you?
Toronto!
This is a very exciting night for us.
I'm really freaking excited to be here tonight.
All right, today. Welcome. Overwhelming. How's that?
No, I just meant their response.
Congratulations. It started from a radio show for real. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I was listening to the show Radio Lab, and they had done an episode on Matt Bai's book about Gary Hart. And when I listened to it, I just couldn't imagine that there was a moment in our history when the presumed next president of the United States was in a dark alleyway in the middle of the night with 3 reporters, and no one knew what to do because no one had been in that situation before.
Is that how, like, when you were putting it together, did you have the same thought?
Sorry, I sometimes spit lightning bolts. It's just some fun. I did.
Watch out.
I'm the next Avenger. No, they. I did have much the same thought. It goes back a long way. I mean, I met Gary Hart when I was writing for the New York Times Magazine. He was a pretty new writer there in 2002. I wrote a piece which repeated, quite honestly, a lot of the sort of tropes and misperceptions about the scandal. I'm not proud of that. I wasn't proud of it at the time. It was a fine piece, but it didn't delve deeply enough. And I thought about it for years afterward. It kind of stayed with me. I thought Hart had been incredibly impressive. I was watching, as Jay was from the other side as a political operative, what it was to cover presidential campaigns in the modern era and how the system was sort of broken. And I began to feel there was a connection that needed to be explored. And I went back and did this book on Gary Hart and explored a lot of those themes, and that's what Jason saw very much the same way. And Jay and I had been working together, and the 3 of us came together and had this vision for what the movie could be.
What attracted you to it? This.
Jason Reitman was the first thing I heard. The script is coming that Jason is going to direct. And as an actor, you read things with a certain framework when you get to page 1, and my framework the entire time was, please love this, because I'm a massive fan of Jason. So
If this sucks, I don't want to have to say no.
I was going to say yes anyway, basically. It just so happened I was on a gap year in 1987 when all this happened. I was turning 19 and probably drunk most of the year. I remember very little of it, if anything. So I really, as an outsider, as an Aussie, I took to the story very fresh, and I found it very somehow relevant. And weirdly, sort of, someone who loves puzzles, there was a piece of the puzzle that I never knew about, but somehow made sense a little bit of what was happening today. I'm also a journalism major, so I was very interested in that. And so, story, director, story, I'm in.
Helen, it's hard to tell this story and watch this story without being completely connected to today. It's an impossible reality in a sense, because you're looking at it thinking, that sunk a front runner. And there was never even really an admission, but that sunk a front runner. Talk about the lessons that politicians have learned since then about this Gary Hart ordeal?
Oh, well, I'm not a politician, so I don't know what the lessons they might have learned, but I do know that one of the reasons we were so excited about this was because it was a way to engage with the questions that I think were many questions we're asking ourselves about today without having the divisiveness of having to be talking about something that's happening right now, and sort of having a bit of space to be able to look at it from with some perspective and say, oh, it's really interesting that it's so different now, but what does this mean for how we think of men in power? What does it mean for the women who work for or with him? What does it mean for all of these different things? And being able to ask those questions and engage in those ideas in a way that felt more comfortable and more easy to have those conversations that still are very relevant to what we should be thinking about today.
I mean, you've worked with politicians. They've learned from this, right?
They have. I mean, part of what drew me to this is I worked in politics for 15 years, and as Matt, and it really broke my heart. I went into it with as much idealism as you could possibly have and left it with a lot of cynicism. As Matt started to tell me about his book when he was working on it, he was like talking me through it, and I just said, that is a fucking movie. And it was a movie that I wanted to be a part of, because it was a way to, as Helen just said, it was a way to speak to what we were going through today. Although today, when we started this, was years ago. So a lot of people have thought like, oh, these guys must have woken up the day after, November 10th, 2016, and started this movie. We were into this movie years ago. We had a script that was basically the one more or less the one we shot well before Election Day. This was something that Matt saw coming, and that for various reasons we felt drawn to well before the world got into the much more messed up place that it is today.
Jason, as a filmmaker, this is, I've heard a lot of people talk about how this is a different film for you to make, but this is a different film for you to make as well. Did it feel that way?
It did. I mean, first of all, this is a movie about real people. And this is the first time I felt the responsibility as a storyteller, and I know you felt the same way, that, we're dealing with real people's lives, people who are still alive today, and there's something that's scary about that. And I took a different tact stylistically to the film. The Frontrunner is a movie that is asking you constantly what is important and what is relevant. And we wanted to do that as filmmakers as well. So it's a film where you're looking at 12 different points of view. There are often 2 to 3 conversations happening on camera at once. And we shot it in this kind of 1970s style that is making you, as a viewer, constantly trying to figure out and make a decision about, all right, who do I want to follow? What is the important conversation? Because that's what really the whole film is about.
You take these really important moments where, especially when Donna's talking and when the women in this film are talking, everything else around it stops.
Yeah.
So when I'm watching the film, especially when the men are going, there's a lot of noise, it's a lot of layers, but then when these characters, when Vera has her moment, like, it stops, and you're forced to focus on them and their story. Was that intentional?
Certainly. Look, this is, The Frontrunner is a movie that is also very interested in the emotional burden that is put on women during a scandal. Whether it's Donna Rice, a young, bright, aspirational woman who had her life just stolen from her, it was just kind of ripped out of her hands, or whether you were one young woman working at the Washington Post, or one young woman working on a campaign and are forced to speak for your entire gender. I mean, this is a conversation that Helen and I got into all the time while making this film, and it would get heated in the best way.
And it was something I loved about, I love Molly Ephraim as Irene Kelly is one of my favorite characters, because I think that that's something that you don't see a lot. And when you're talking about these various things or things that happen, are all of the women who have to do all of this work that's sort of not expected of men often, so.
We'll take some questions from here as well. Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Andrea Case, CTV News. Question, has Gary Hart seen the film? Number 1. Number 2, will you show it to him? Number 3, Hugh Jackman, did you talk to him at all in terms of researching this role?
Yeah, I brought the film to Denver about a week ago and showed it to Gary and Lee Hart. We all went for hot chocolate after. And it's interesting to show them the movie because at first I was presuming that the reaction would be how complicated it is for them to watch it and talk about the emotional journey. And their first response was, Hugh is so good. He's such a good actor. And Gary at one point said, do I really talk like that? And Lee said, yes, that's exactly how you talk.
I spent some time with Gary and his family before filming. Obviously, out of respect, I've never played someone who is alive. I played real people who...
Wolverine is real.
I'm sorry, apart from Wolverine. It's a secret. I told you backstage, George. And of course, out of respect for him, but also in terms of the process, what was most important to me was every single person. I spoke to many people before I met Gary, and almost every one of them, the only thing in common was this word enigma. And how smart, he's one of the best politicians of the past 50 years, many things. But I wanted to sit there and be with him to understand what it is like to be around that sort of mysterious, enigmatic quality. And I saw that. There were so many parts of me. He's as sharp, I imagine, as he's ever been. You probably could speak to that, Matt. Very interested, very knowledgeable on any subject of what's going on today. And I have actual great respect for him, and we have, I would say, an affection and friendship now.
The Gary Hart that is portrayed in this film is not the Gary Hart that any of us saw in the newsreel clips of back in the day. You saw the smile, you saw the hiding Gary Hart. I think a lot of people will gain an insight into him. If you think had Gary Hart won that and won the election, maybe there's no two George Bush presidencies, maybe there's no Clinton. It's a whole different Democratic Party, you know. And having been so close to it, the impact that one man's fall had is pretty enormous.
Yeah, I'm an Australian, so I'm seeing this from an outsider's point of view. I haven't voted in any election here. But spending time with Gary, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what it was, but at one point he shared with me his 100-day plan if he had made it into office. And I can categorically tell you it would be probably a very different world today if that had happened.
A question over here? Yes, in the back there. Yes, sir.
Hi, Reggie Winter from the Toronto Star. It's a question for the writers and Jason. I mean, obviously this is a film, so it's based on a true story and a book. There's obviously some creative license, but is there anywhere that you wouldn't go or you wouldn't want to sort of fictionalize from this story? Was there a limit to that?
Look, it's a great question, particularly on this film, because the film is always asking, what should we know? What do we need to know? What do we want to know? And for screenwriters, that becomes a very tricky question, because we want to leave that in your hands. We want this movie to be one that, as an audience, you're going to have, one person's going to have a completely different experience from the next person. You ask one person about this, and they'll say, well, I don't think we need to know what's going on in a president's bedroom. And the next person may say, well, actually, they want to be the president. Everything should be available. These should have no secrets. We need to know everything. And neither person is right. And we want this to be a film where people can have that conversation after. So it is a movie. You do need to create dialogue for characters, and you do need to take them through an emotional arc. But the facts are the facts in the film. What was important is that we give people different points of view. That even within the Washington Post, you have 5 different characters: young, old, male, female, veterans, newcomers, each debating how do we pursue this story. This is obviously something that people are interested. Obviously, people want to know. The Miami Herald has done this groundwork. Where do we go with this? And I'm hoping the people in the audience feel like they are right in that room, trying to make that decision with them, trying to figure out what is relevant. What do I actually need to know?
Yes, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Isaac Richter from Tiempo Libre. You mentioned that you were developing this film, the script, before the 2016 election and everything that happened, but did that event shape anything about how the film turned out, or did it inspire you to talk about any certain topic, certain scene that might have come about?
It certainly made the story feel more relevant to us. I don't think it had changed it, though. We had already written the script. and our interests remain the same.
I mean, Matt approached the book. I mean, Matt can say how he approached the book, but in my view, when he talked about it to me, and we had a lot of conversations. Our relationship goes back to 1999. He was covering Bill Bradley's presidential campaign. I was on the other side as an operative. We watched the process get more and more broken throughout our relationship. We kept a good relationship, but we watched the process get more and more messed up, more and more broken. And so, as Matt talked about the book, and I said that's a fucking movie, it's because I thought that it'd be great to tell that story with more mass appeal than a book might get. That was in a weird way. 2016 didn't surprise either of us, and didn't surprise a lot of us on this stage. But we were telling a story of a system that we felt was broken from the inside for a long time. 16 was just more broken, maybe more quickly than we thought it would be.
And it raises, I guess, a question that we're all interested in, and that is, whoever we're going to elect is going to be a human being, and a human being is going to have flaws, and we need to ask ourselves at all times, what kind of flaws do we want in that person?
If it's broken, is it fixable?
Yes.
Yeah, George, it's a depressing question.
I'm looking for hope up here, please. Yes, right here. Yes, sir.
Hi, Neil Smith, BBC News. Hugh, does making a film like this make you consider how you might fare in the political sphere, especially as who knows, there's maybe quite a few vacancies in your home country, given the rapid turnover.
I endorse him immediately.
I do too.
I'm down.
100%.
I'll make signs.
I will work for you.
Someone start the pins.
Yeah,
Just don't rule it out, Hugh. Whatever you do, no categorical statements here.
Yes. The opposite. That's a good question. Literally, there was no particular aspiration to run for politics. After looking into the world, it makes me want to run even further. I think it's a very, very... And one thing I love about the film is this cauldron of a campaign, as the movie sees it, not just from the candidate's point of view, but from the volunteers, from the press, from the family. Decisions, really important decisions, are being made on the fly under immense pressure. I think, plus now, as Matt says so brilliantly in his book, post-Watergate, every single journalist, every voter is assuming there's a flaw that needs to be found out. So I'm going to find out the flaw. Thank God, as an actor, we don't have that standard because there wouldn't be any actors left. And I don't know if I can handle it, to be honest. Too thin-skinned, I think.
Although 10-year-old tweets are starting to come out for people, and that's bringing them down.
But New York has a history of senators who come from other places, and the great thing about an Australian is you haven't voted on anything. You have no record to attack.
Think about his appeal in Erie County.
I think there's something to be done.
I don't know about you guys. I believe everything's fixable because I'm an optimist. But, they're laughing at me. Yeah. See, that's the optimist actor, and why I probably should never go into politics. But
no, I'm with you, Hugh. But I really would vote for you. So.
Oh, thank you. I love the line. I was just thinking about it this morning that my character has, that he believes in the sanctity of the process. And I think one thing I love about the film is it sort of reminds us that, yes, it's broken. And by the way, I'm saying that as an Australian. I think we've just elected our 6th Prime Minister in the last 7 years or something. So however, it's definitely a process. The democratic process is something worth fighting for, I would say. There's not a country on the planet, a democratic country, where the people of that country wouldn't want to change something of that process. But what I love about the movie is I think people are arguing about which parts of the process do we keep, which parts are worth fighting for, what is important, what is not.
I think that's kind of where we're at now. I know there's lots of people who like the system in the United States right now, and a lot of people who don't. But what struck me as very different from this film is the reporters are the same now as they were then. They ask the questions. The difference is the audience then, the voter, really cared about the private life, and clearly now they don't really care. So there seems to be this enormous shift in what the voter is willing to accept. Because a lot of the stuff about the current president came out before the election, and they still went to the polls and made the decision. So maybe there has been a real shift, and that if it settles a little bit, we'll have a more stable kind of reality. So maybe change is afoot.
Well, I don't think it's. I think it's narrow. Yes, the public cares less, but I also think it's. the story's bigger than do we care about people's sex lives or not about their sex lives. In a sense, the question is, what things matter in a candidacy? Can we focus on things that matter? Do we assume that everyone do we as journalists, myself, having covered 5 presidential campaigns, do we assume that everybody's lying, everybody's fraudulent, and it's our job to find out how? Or do we endeavor to sort of provide the context that character requires? What have they been for their whole lives, their whole careers? How have they voted? Have they been corrupt? Have they been honest with constituents in addition to being honest with their wife, right? I mean, what is the measure of someone's integrity in that context? I think those are questions we still wrestle with, particularly in a news cycle that goes so fast. And I think the point, the movie's a great movie because this is an amazing cinematic story that people don't remember, and Hugh is so fantastic, in my view, in that role of that. It's compelling in and of itself, but it's also an opportunity, I think, for all of us, we hope, to sort of leave asking each other and arguing about, what it is that matters, and are we getting how do you draw context from a political discussion that has oftentimes an hour or a 10-minute life cycle.
We did actually write this movie from a deeply hopeful, idealistic place. Like I say that I left politics cynical. I left it cynical about the process, but hopeful about its ability to change. And part of what we brought to the script, and then what Jason and Hugh and the rest of the cast brought to the movie is this is a deeply human movie. We show people, not the people that are involved in politics are human beings trying to make difficult decisions every single day, and we tried to show that. There are no black hats or white hats in our story. There's a lot of gray because people, a guy in one scene makes the right decision, and the next scene makes the wrong decision. That's just life.
Judgment. You didn't assign a lot of value at all to that. Other questions here? Well, there you go. Go ahead, Neil.
Hi, Hugh. Just to brighten things out a bit, this is going to be one of the first things people have seen you in since The Greatest Showman, which is still riding high in the charts of my country and many others. Have you come to grips with that? How much of a phenomenon that film and the soundtrack has been, and what a enormous success it's been internationally?
Come to grips with it is one term. According to my family, I'm very annoying how I keep bringing it up. My 13-year-old daughter, when I say, oh, by the way, we're still number 1, nobody cares, Dad. Is often the refrain I hear at home. If you come later tonight, Matt Bai does an amazing version of A Million Dreams. I don't know if you'd be willing to do it now, but yeah, it's been an incredible. Honestly,
I would, but it gets me so emotional here. I can't go on.
But thank you, mate. It has been truly incredible, and honestly, and this is not just a lazy segue, but to think of having Logan and that movie, but all the while working on a Jason Reitman film about an issue which I think is very relevant and a movie I'm extremely proud of. I certainly am at a point in my career that I pinch myself, and I feel very, very blessed.
It will give him appeal upstate in New York that a lot of New York City residents don't have when they run for Senate. So.
What did you learn about politics throughout this process? Like when you finished the whole thing?
A lot. I think I mentioned I was 10 years old when this happened. I didn't know this story. And I'm not a student of history. I'm someone madly in love with movies. And I've always wanted to make film as I'm interested in human beings. And in Gary Hart and the people around him, I saw a lot of complex characters that I wanted to portray. This is a unique screenplay, It was co-written by a political journalist who covered many presidential campaigns, the former press secretary for Howard Dean, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and, the son of the guy who directed Ghostbusters. So I think we all brought a lot to the table, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, we are in Reitman Square, so.
Behave.
What did you learn, Helen?
Oh no, I mean, this makes me sound dumb. I didn't realize that the way candidates were chosen before, what is it, 1972? Like, I didn't know that this was, a part of this was because of a shift of how we chose the candidates that were running, which felt to me like such a big deal and such an obvious change that it was embarrassing to me that I got to the age that I am not even knowing that about the way America worked.
This comes out on the day of the midterms, right? Shouldn't it have come out the day before? So people could see it before they go to the polls?
My advice is, first thing, vote.
Yeah.
Second thing, go see our movie.
Are you watching the midterms with a completely like out of this world focus this time?
I mean, I left that business sort of with my hair on fire. And I do follow it. I mean, I follow it probably much more than your average person. That's actually not true. Your average person follows it way more than I follow it now. I'm very often running into people like at the beach who are like, can you believe the spread and the fave-unfave in California 32? And I'm like, no, I'm not following. And so I do follow it, but you know, I'm not deep inside the Nunez race or the latest DCCC polls. Right. You know, I care, I vote, but I'm not like an insider about this anymore, thankfully.
Thanks for everybody's time today.
Thanks, George.
We appreciate it.
Thank you,
George.
George.